Catching criminals is no easy job.
Making it so rescue.
But it's even harder when the criminal is a cop turned bad.
He liked having power and authority and status and a uniform.
When the police officers who were sworn to protect us turned to rape,
she was actually meeting a monster.
Murder.
What happened in those minutes or moments or seconds where he chose to go and get a weapon?
Robbery.
He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are.
And even blackmail and poisoning. All just to get what they want. In this series, I'm enlisting the help of 3 experts.
That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
2 senior officers who've put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
He was in such a lofty position that he thought he was untouchable.
And a psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't feel remorse.
In this series, I'll be investigating why some cops put themselves on the wrong side of the law, abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes. This is a story of a police officer who received an award for bravery, but lured into the prospect of easy money, he abused his position as a cop to rob and steal. And for a while, he got away with it. In March 2020, Metropolitan Police Officer Kashif Mahmood signed out a marked patrol car from his station in Stoke Newington. He took the car and picked up what appeared to be another uniformed officer. The pair travelled here to Chingford in Essex, and with their police car, pulled over a black Range Rover on this road. Mahmood then used his police powers to search the vehicle. In the black Range Rover, they discovered a bag filled with thousands of pounds in cash. But this is where the story gets odd. So instead of arresting the driver, PC Kashif Mahmood just let him go. But he took all the money. To everyone who knew him, Kashif Mahmood was an upstanding police officer, commended for his bravery. It was Kashif Mahmood's boyhood dream to join the police. As it turned out, his criminal connections ran deep. So did his temptation for easy money and a luxury lifestyle. To help me unravel this case, I'm on my way to meet up with Sue Hill, who has 30 years' experience with the Metropolitan Police, investigating some of the most serious crimes committed in the capital. So, Kashif Mahmood, what do we know about him?
Kashif Mahmood was from a pretty poor, underprivileged background, surrounded by young people in the same kind of situation. But it's very easy to target kids, you know, the have-nots who haven't got the training shoes, the latest phone, and mum and dad aren't going to buy it for you, and the only way you're going to get that is by joining that gang and being involved in criminality. Kashif grew up surrounded by criminality, a lot of gangs, and he wanted to break out of that. He wanted to go a different way.
So hearing that, he sounds like a person who's got his morals right. He doesn't want to get involved in gangs.
There was peer pressure trying to engage with him, and he didn't want to do that. And in doing so, because he didn't want to join, he ends up getting stabbed. I mean, strength of character to say no, but he ends up as a victim at their hands, seriously injured. I imagine that fueled his kind of ambition to do the right thing, to get away from criminality and protect other young people. And he joined the Metropolitan Police.
Aged 21, Mahmood realised his boyhood dream of becoming a police officer. It wasn't until 10 years later that things started to unravel for him. I've come to the North London police station where Mahmood was based, to meet BBC crime correspondent Tom Simons, who covered this case. So we're here outside Stoke Newington police station where Mahmood actually worked.
This is a very busy police station. It's a busy part of London. There's a lot of policing to do in this area. And he was what they call team in the police. It's response. He answers 999 calls. He goes when something's happening. It's an exciting job, a stressful job. He works shifts day and night. He's got a lot of freedom to go wherever he wants within this part of London. He's not being watched by a more senior police officer all the time. He's not in a team of detectives where he's been tasked to go and do something.
And for the early part of Mahmood's career, he excelled in his dream job.
We know that he was a good police officer, an active police officer, because he had a commissioner's commendation from Sir John Stevens, the commissioner at the time, in 2014. So that demonstrates he was a committed cop.
But in May 2017, another side of PC Mahmood began to show when he was guarding a cordon at the site of an incident and was being pestered by a member of the public.
What happened when the protesters kept coming at him and kept coming back at him, making rude remarks and having a go at him, Mahmood basically blew his top and grabbed hold of this bloke, and he was overzealous and pushed him, forced him against the wall, and in doing so hurt his head, caused injuries. The individual was arrested but then made a complaint to the IOPC, and what they do, they investigate the complaint, and they looked at Mahmood's body camera that had video recorded what had happened and said, well, it's overzealous. He overstepped the mark and he ended up going to magistrates' court.
So he was convicted of an assault?
He was convicted at magistrates' court and then went through a misconduct hearing, and he had his job back.
Hang on. So a police officer can get charged with assault, but then can also get their job back as a police officer?
I've never known it. It didn't happen when I was there, but he absolutely was convicted and then came back into the police service.
Do you think that's right?
No, I don't think it's right. I fully understand when someone's younger, before they join, they might make mistakes. It might be a minor theft or a schoolboy scrimmage or something's happened on a football pitch, something minor. But when you're a police officer, you know, to act disproportionately and overzealous and attack this individual, then I'm surprised that he came back into the police. Very surprised.
Kashif Mahmood was found guilty of assault by beating and was sentenced to 200 hours community service. He was allowed to keep his job on the force, but after gaining a criminal conviction, his shining record as a decorated officer was shattered.
The Independent Office for Police Conduct said that he had overstepped the mark, and this was criminal activity. So here's a guy who effectively breaks the law in uniform, manages to stay in the police. Maybe that had some impression on him psychologically. It made him think, well, if I can get away with that, maybe there's something else I can get away with.
And something else seems to have been ignited by the incident. Having been convicted of an offence, Mahmood seems to have made contact with old friends from his school days.
Now, I wonder whether or not he was feeling a bit kind of let down by the fact he's been charged with the assault, and now he's really unhappy about what's happened. No one stood by him, and he's been convicted. And was that the thing that triggered him to reconnect with Mohsin Khan and Shabazz and Shahzad? And they were old school friends, old associates from way back.
But these were not any old friends.
These individuals who he'd reconnected with ran a big organised crime group coming out of Ilford in Essex.
Reconnecting with his past was the beginning of the end for Kashif Mahmood. His honourable career as a cop would soon be a distant memory. On the surface, PC Kashif Mahmood was seen as a model cop, having joined the Metropolitan Police in 2010. After a challenging upbringing, Mahmood had finally realised his boyhood dream of becoming a police officer. But in 2018, he was convicted of assault whilst on duty for using excessive force. But despite this criminal conviction, Mahmood was allowed to continue his job as a police officer. But his experience had changed him, as BBC correspondent Tom Simons explains to me. He avoids going down the wrong path and getting stabbed for that, but then he ends up going onto the wrong side of the law. What do you think happened there?
I think it's his friends. So Mohsin Khan, who is one of his friends, and his two brothers were heavily involved in this gang being run from Dubai. And somehow he ends up having a chat about possibilities. And obviously those possibilities are entirely criminal. And I think that gang's been keeping an eye out for him. They've worked out that the only thing that he could do for them is be a corrupt police officer and use his uniform to try and get something for them.
Was he thinking, who's going to speak out about what I'm doing here?
I think they make him an offer, and who knows? Is it his bad side? Is it boredom? Is it greed? Most crime is really just about greed. But something makes him decide to do what they asked him to do, which was to go out there and to steal money from criminals, which is a pretty dangerous thing to try and do.
Mahmood was ordered by the Khans to target rival criminals using his police powers and relieve them of huge amounts of cash. So what was the plan Mahmood and his associates came up with?
Basically, they got involved in taking money from drug dealers. They knew when the drug dealers had purchased the drugs, and they also knew when money was exchanged.
The one thing I want to understand is how Mahmood and the other gang members knew where the cash was going to be at any given time. To help me understand this complex case of criminals stealing from criminals, I've asked for the help of ex-senior detective Howard Groves. He was stealing, and his gang was stealing from other drug dealers and other criminals. Is that a difficult area for the police?
Of course it is, because 9 times out of 10 the police won't know what's happening. Because if we start right at the beginning, we know it's July of 2019. Mahmood meets somebody called Mushtabi Niazman. Now, that individual was identified as a businessman, but he had actually been arrested and charged with a blackmail offense where he had threatened someone. But for whatever reason, he then fled to Dubai, and the case was discontinued. So you're asking yourself the question of what is his connection with this individual? The connection between them was the Khan brothers, because the Khan brothers were obviously drug suppliers. Niazman was involved in drugs as well.
In 2019, Kashif Mahmood and 2 of the Khan brothers flew to Dubai to meet Niazman and discussed a plan to use Mahmood's police status and resources to steal cash from rival gangs.
Niazman in Dubai was controlling the gang, and he was trying to avoid anybody reading the messages that he used to control what was going on in the UK. And so he used EncroChat, this system of encrypted phones that nobody can break into.
Niazman was sending messages over an encrypted communications network known as EncroChat to let Mahmood know the times and places he bought drugs from other gangs. With intelligence sent from the gang's network in Dubai, Mahmood is using his powers as a police officer to steal hundreds of thousands in drug money from rival gangs.
I think what comes across from Niazman is the way he's controlling this operation with Mahmood, who's going out, who's stopping cars and robbing drug couriers. He's saying, let's try this one, let's try that one. He's passing on information. He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are, and so he can put his guy in exactly the right place, and of course Mahmood does the rest.
Mahmood was essentially hiding in plain sight, operating under the gang's instructions, intercepting cars and seizing their drugs and cash in the name of the law.
If you're trying to steal drugs off drug gangs, which is what he was doing, probably the best thing to be is a guy in uniform, police badge, police warrant card, showing who you are. It's very difficult if you're stopped by a police officer to say, hang on a sec, is this really a police officer? Of course, we've seen cases since this one where people have pretended to be police officers with devastating effect.
On 7 different occasions over the next 5 months, between November 2019 and March 2020, PC Mahmood took marked police cars from Stoke Newington Police Station on days when he was signed off sick. He would then pull over drug dealers with the help of another man. The man in the car with him wasn't even a police officer. It was his bodybuilder friend, Johan Gergel. He was wearing a police stab vest. Would he be stopping these people in his uniform?
Yeah, he was stopping people in his uniform, and he also had Erwan with him, his friend, who was dressed up like in a pseudo uniform, in a stab vest, and he would be with him like a big bodybuilder, like protection Romanian guy, and that was his associate. So when he stopped people to take the drug money, doing a stop and search, then obviously they're not going to say, this cop stopped me and took my drugs money, so he got away with the money.
They made unlawful stop and searches on these drug dealers and stole hundreds of thousands in cash.
So when the drug dealers had sold the drugs, they knew where the money was going to be. And what happened then, they stopped those individuals and took the drugs money away from them. So therefore, not only do they have the money, they could also keep the drugs and also keep the money.
I think a lot of criminals realise something about crime, the obvious thing, that you can become quite rich quite quickly. I think he probably thought, I'll put some money into the family, I'll do this for a bit, I'll get away with it, I won't get caught, and then I'll stop. Of course, greed never ends, and that's what I think a lot of criminals find hard to fight with.
The corrupt scheme was working like a charm. But how was Mahmoud able to use a police car without his colleagues knowing, especially when he was meant to be on sick leave? He was actually taking out police cars. What do we know from that? Does that mean it's quite easy to do what he did?
Well, take a look at this police station. It's heavily guarded. I know I've been actually out with police from this police station in their police cars. Once you're inside those gates, which you need a warrant card or ID card to get into a police station to get the other side, you've pretty much got free range. And quite clearly, the police were not checking who were taking cars out. He was using other people's names. He was signing cars out when he was off sick, for example, or not on duty. So he must have been walking through the corridors of the police station, past people who perhaps knew that he wasn't supposed to be there, but nobody spotted it. Something the police will have to look at, I think.
And Mahmoud and his fake cop friend Gergel were raking it in. The bogus stop and searches were lifting hundreds of thousands of pounds from rival gangs.
And I think what is interesting is that none of the people he robbed thought, hang on a sec, this police officer has stopped me, he's searched my vehicle, he's asked me what I'm doing, presumably, he's found some money, he may have found some drugs, but he hasn't arrested me. What's going on here? And I think if they thought about it for a few minutes, they might have realised that this might be a scam. But of course, they too are criminals, so they can't really report it.
Exactly, they hang themselves if they report it as well. Relying on the fact that criminals won't come forward or speak out, Mahmoud carried on with his robberies.
He was taking money away from those young people who were like runners. The consequences, when you don't deliver the goods and money to the person who's bought the drugs, your masters, then consequences are immense.
People lower down the ladder going back saying, we've had it taken off us, everything's gone, and they probably got something happening to them for that.
Well, that's right.
All seemed to be going well for Kashif Mahmoud and the gang he was working for, all until they pulled over the wrong car at the wrong time.
It all starts to go wrong on the 8th of March 2020. Mahmoud comes to the police station, even though he's off sick. He takes a police car out in somebody else's name. He drives to Chingford, which is not his patch. He shouldn't be there, certainly not in a police car, because he knows that there's going to be a deal taking place in a residential street. So what happened was the drug dealer is there. One of the Khan brothers turns up in his car. He gets in the drug courier's car, hands over £400,000. He then leaves. They then wait a few seconds, and suddenly the police car turns up. Mahmoud comes along, he parks next to that car, he gets out, he pretends to search it. He takes the money, he drives off.
But this was the point at which Kashif Mahmoud's luck ran out.
The problem was that across the street, there was another police unit. That police unit was an anti-money laundering unit that was doing an undercover investigation. They were watching the drug courier. They thought, what the hell's going on here? They actually stopped Mahmoud and asked him why he had stopped and searched the car. He told them that he smelt cannabis on the driver's breath, that he thought perhaps there was something going on. There'd been a couple of bags in the car, but nothing else.
Mahmoud had lied to his fellow officers. Unbeknownst to them, he had in fact taken a huge stash of money.
The undercover unit wanted to know a bit more, so they said, would you mind filling out an intelligence report? So Mahmood goes back to his police station late at night. He then writes up his report and thinks he's got away with it.
Mahmood may have felt safe, but he was anything but. You know those criminals that would never report being robbed? Well, one of them walked into a police station and made some pretty extraordinary claims about what Mahmood had been up to.
How would they prove that somebody who had legitimate reason to take it, like a police officer, is the person who actually stopped them and took the money? How are they, the person who was a courier, going to prove that? If I was a drug dealer, I was a kingpin, I'd be thinking, you're trying to pull one on me. You got the money for yourself, so you best sort it out. And even if you do, I'm going to make sure that, for example, to others, it doesn't happen. So they would have been petrified. And maybe that's why that one went in a black Range Rover and actually reported it, because he probably thought, I've got to do this.
So we have this confession from a drugs courier who voluntarily came forward, and a report made by the police unit who had seen Mahmood conduct a stop and search on a car with no probable cause. He's now starting to look very suspicious.
You can imagine at the time, those money laundering officers wondered, why did he happen to pull over that vehicle? They've got under surveillance. And then finding out later that he was off sick, alarm bells were ringing that he's a wrong un, he's involved in criminality.
And from that moment then, is this just where it spirals out of everything that he's been doing?
As a result of that stop and search, the anti-corruption command got involved, and they started looking at him and investigating him, and then realised that Mahmood was looking and researching the Asmand so far back as 2019. They knew then that they were associates and they were onto something.
Anti-corruption investigators believed Mahmood was feeding this information gained directly from the police computers back to Niesmond in Dubai. But this wasn't the only smoking gun that police discovered, as they secretly built a case against their own officer. Yeah, that one picture has him banged to rights. In early 2020, Metropolitan Police Officer Kashif Mahmood was being secretly investigated for stealing money for a criminal gang based out of Dubai. Unbeknownst to him, the investigators already had incriminating evidence provided by his own police body cam. We've got an image here.
Yes, that's obviously him getting into the vehicle, and that's his co-pilot, his cohort there, sitting in the front passenger seat.
When Mahmood and his fake cop friend Johan Gergel performed an illegal stop and search on a drug dealer's car in order to steal their money, he failed to notice his police body cam was triggered, catching some very incriminating evidence, showing that the man accompanying Mahmood was in fact not a police officer at all. So, in evidence, he's not a police officer?
No.
And they know that, so they're going to go, why has he got a police issue?
Exactly. The stab vest he's wearing, it. He looks, to all intents and purposes, like a police officer. Yeah?
Yeah.
And obviously, Mahmood knows about that. And off they're going to go to take money off of someone else.
So he doesn't know his body cam's recording at this point. This is what I'm saying. He's hung himself with this evidence because you can't explain that away. Is there no way of deleting what your body cam records?
No, because if that's the case, then police officers who are corrupt would have a means of being able to say, I've attacked you, I've done whatever, and I know how to get rid of it. So it's kept somewhere completely remote from it. Even though you have it, you can't actually stop what's happening.
Wow, if that one picture has him banged to rights. Blissfully unaware that he's being investigated, Mahmood continued his illegal raids on rival drug couriers. With intelligence sent from the gang's network in Dubai, Mahmood is using his powers as a police officer to steal hundreds of thousands in drug money from rival gangs. This is despite the fact that fellow Met officers had already questioned him about a previous stop he had made on a drug courier's car in Essex on the 8th of March 2020.
He doesn't stop after that incident in Chingford. And I get the impression that at this point, his controller in Dubai, Niesmond, is really seeing the opportunity to make a lot of money. So he's getting instructions from Niesman, who's in Dubai, via the EncroChat messages, and he tells Mahmoud to get into work, even though he's on sick leave, pick up a car and head this time for Wembley, where there's another courier who's moving around with some drugs in a van. And he sends him another message. He says, bro, be normal. Don't be cocky, because the police aren't cocky when they stop people. He says, and make sure you search that van for more money. He says, it's got to be 500K to 1 million, bro. A lot of money expected in that van. And so sure enough, and we don't have too many details on this, Mahmoud drives up to Wembley, stops this guy, pretends to search him, the same old trick, takes the money and heads back into London. Job done.
So, yet again, Mahmoud books out a vehicle, meets up with his cohort, Gergel, and they head off in the direction of Wembley. 90 miles per hour plus, they head towards Wembley, where they go to a venue and they then steal at least £450,000 in cash.
450,000?
A lot of money.
On the 25th of March 2020, Mahmoud and his accomplice stole £450,000 from a courier as the proceeds of selling drugs. Though Mahmoud is now operating like a seasoned criminal, he wasn't always like this. So I've asked psychologist Serena Simmons to help me understand why a decorated cop who has a wife and family would turn to criminality. We know that Mahmoud grew up in a bit of a rough area, and I think he was sort of trying to be brought into a gang and didn't want to do that. What's it like for people that are growing up in an area where, you know, there is gangs and there's that temptation?
I think the word temptation is spot on. I think it's really tempting for someone just to follow suit when they're growing up in that area because that's their norm. I think the sad thing with this particular case is we know that Mahmoud had resistance to that. So I think he saw something and he thought, I don't want to be like that. So early on we see signs that he wanted to kind of rebut that trend and not go down the same path that maybe he'd seen other people in his community go down.
Yeah, and he actually got stabbed because he didn't want to join the gang, and still he stayed on the right path.
Yeah, he really resisted that. He must have worked incredibly hard because you imagine how much kind of self-talk he had to do to think, no, I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to do what these other people are doing.
But he did end up snapping in May 2017 when he assaulted a member of the public whilst on duty. He doesn't lose his job. He continues on as a police officer. Do you think that could have been a turning point?
I wonder whether it was just a series of kind of puzzle pieces that fell into place, meeting particular people, having particular conversations, being around criminals and within kind of that kind of group of people wasn't unusual for him. He'd been raised in a deprived area among gangs, and so maybe he was used to having conversations with people like that, and it was those conversations that started to present themselves, and from there maybe that's when a plan started to form.
March 2020, and Kashif Mahmoud has no idea investigators are building a case against him. And they're getting help from police in Europe, who are decrypting the messages to Mahmoud from the criminal mastermind of the gang, Mushtaba Niesman, based in Dubai.
When the European police realised that criminals all over Europe were using a system called EncroChat to talk to each other, and they ended up, the French police, breaking in digitally to the system and placing a digital device, a bit of code in the system, so that they could record effectively the texts that were coming through the whole network. And that was the biggest breakthrough, I think, in policing against serious organised crime in recent times. These criminals thought the police could not be watching them, but the police were in effect looking over their shoulders, reading every single text.
Mahmoud and his gang, like most global organised criminals, had been writing and sending messages using EncroChat without fear of them being read by the authorities.
was so crucial when the police were able to hack into EncroChat, and they managed to identify 6,500 criminals and organised gangs, you know, drug importation, serious crime. Then you've got this organised gang over here, and they were looking at the messages, and that was good intelligence to lead them to Mahmoud.
And that was literally the nail in Mahmoud's coffin. The Met was closing in on Mahmoud, and at 2:40 in the morning on the 28th of April 2020, police arrived at his and his wife Shireen's home in Essex with a search warrant.
The police were reasonably satisfied that they had sufficient evidence, so they went to the address of Mahmoud and he was arrested. But before the officers were able to enter the premises, Mahmoud had directed his wife to remove a box. The disturbing thing about that is that Mahmoud's wife, Shireen, was also a police officer.
His wife's a police officer?
She's a police officer.
If you're a police officer breaking the law, it's quite handy if you've got another police officer in the family, and he did. His wife was a police officer in a different part of London, a different borough command unit, as it's called. And she came in very handy, because eventually Mahmoud works out that he's likely to get raided by the police. He tells his wife, and just before the raid, she manages to hide a shoebox containing some amount of money and some watches, because she knows where the police are likely to look when they do a search.
Through the messages they had decrypted on EncroChat, the police had found out about the money Mahmoud had illegally seized, but to this day haven't discovered the cash.
And that shoebox was never found. The judge thought there might actually have been something like £100,000 in that shoebox.
By asking his wife to hide the money, Mahmoud had made her an accomplice.
I think that when push came to shove and he was finally caught, I think it would have created sheer panic in him. Not only because of what he'd done, he was now losing status. He'd also involved his family, he'd involved his wife, and I think we see that sense of panic in terms of how he then responded when he was eventually arrested.
Whilst in custody, Mahmoud was made aware of his friend Johan Gergel's starring role in the body cam footage that was accidentally turned on during one of the robberies and revealed he was travelling with a fake cop.
Every criminal makes a mistake like this, and in this case, he probably didn't even know that he'd sat in his car, he'd actually triggered the camera that's worn on the chest, that has quite an easy button to operate, and presumably he turned at some point to the guy next to him in the car, and that guy was Johan Gergel. He wasn't a police officer, he was wearing his wife's police gear, and that really gave the game away, because if he's saying, well look, I'm working as a police officer, I'm out in my police car, that's my defence, I just happened to turn my camera on, well who's this guy sat next to him? He's not a police officer, and that is a severely bad situation for him, all by chance.
Johan Gergel was arrested in Stratford on the same day as Mahmoud. A search of his address revealed a Met stab vest and more than £11,000 in cash. But Mahmoud and his associates had taken a lot more than that. I still want to know what happened to all that money that was stolen and whether the international crime gang he was working with was brought to justice. April 2020. PC Kashif Mahmoud has been arrested for his part in a conspiracy to steal large amounts of cash from drug dealers on the streets of London. The criminal's communications via an encrypted app had been intercepted by police, and now they came to search his house. Investigators found expensive designer watches at his home, and over £40,000 had been put into his family's bank account. His time for playing both sides of the law was over.
During the search, the officers came across at least 3 Rolex watches. One was valued at somewhere in the region of £7,000, and they subsequently found out that he'd actually paid £6,000 cash as part of that deposit. Now, I'm not sure that there are too many police officers with the greatest respect are able to pay £6,000 in cash for a watch. When I was a police officer, I certainly couldn't afford a £6,000 watch. This watch here is 80 quid.
Mahmoud's accomplice, Johan Gergel, who had joined him on the raids and pretended to be a police officer, was also arrested. As was Gergel's wife, Inga, who actually was a trainee police officer and whose police-issue stab vest he was wearing.
Wait, there's how many? So there's 3 police officers involved in this now?
So Inga, Erwan's wife, the point was with her, she's got her husband coming home wearing a stab-proof vest. She's a serving officer. Doesn't matter if she's a trainee, but he was wearing a stab-proof vest coming home, and that was hanging up in the house, and she didn't know anything about it. Ridiculous.
Wow.
She ended up being dismissed from the police.
So she was done for basically lying, because they said there's no way that money could have been there. Those items could have been in the property, and she didn't see it.
Yeah, well, you'd notice if your partner's walking around in a police-issue stab vest, don't you?
Exactly.
Though Inga was dismissed from the force, she escaped prosecution. But whilst Mahmoud and Gergel were in police custody, there was just one last push to get the UK leaders of the gang, the Khan brothers. They were the middlemen from East London who'd made the all-important connection between Mahmoud and Niesmond out in Dubai.
They would have had intelligence which would have meant that they had to arrest the 3 Khan brothers.
On the 7th of July, evidence seized from the addresses linked to the Khans included £140,000 in cash, more than 20 kilograms of cannabis, and a box for an encrypted mobile phone.
So there were lots of moving parts and lots of things that the inquiry team would have to delve into. But the encrypt messaging platform was going to be the vehicle from which they would be able to produce the evidence to convict them subsequently.
The Khan brothers could now be picked up, and the EncroChat messages between the brothers and Niesmond also incriminated Mahmoud's wife, Shireen.
The EncroChat showed that at some point there was a discussion between Niesmond and others about getting rid of the box with the papers in it. That paper is referring to cash. And it implied that Mahmoud's wife, Shireen, had actually disposed of that box. So the officers would then have had to arrest her as well.
When Shireen Kashif eventually went to court, she was spared a major sentence.
Shireen was convicted of money laundering offences. She received a sentence of 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 21 months, with 150 hours of community service order. And obviously, she was shamed and struck off from being a police officer and dismissed.
Her husband, PC Mahmoud, was in much deeper trouble. And with overwhelming evidence against him, including his own body cam footage, there was no talking his way out of it. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to acquire criminal property and misconduct in public office, avoiding the need for a trial, in return for a shorter sentence.
This is an interesting case from a police's point of view. They didn't have everything on a plate. They had to really work for it. But I think this story of this guy going out and stealing from the people who sell drugs, and he's working for a drugs gang at the same time, was really compelling. It was a bit like a crime drama in itself.
His lawyer said his remorse was genuine and he didn't realise the extent of the gang's criminal activity. And he claimed he never took a cut of any money seized.
Lots of criminals are remorseful because they've been caught. I think for Mahmoud, it's a double-edged sword. I think it's bittersweet in that he was crying for himself. He hadn't gained what he wanted to gain, which I think he was aiming for, basically attaining a certain amount of money in a particular lifestyle, and then I wonder whether he would have stopped.
There was no doubt that by turning to criminality, Mahmoud was getting a lot more cash and a much wealthier lifestyle than he had when he was living off just a police wage. So was his motive that simple?
I think, again, greed is at the heart of this. He wanted to live, he wanted to portray a particular lifestyle to people, so any risk was worth taking. Something would have triggered his thoughts around now there being another avenue, another way of being. Was it that he started to become privy to the lifestyle that other people were having as a result of criminal activity. For me, when you look at Mahmood, there's something very deep-seated there in terms of him becoming very attached to the status that being a police officer brought for him. So police are essentially in a position of power and authority, and that comes with some kind of reverence in society. At the same time, showing that you live a particular lifestyle, an affluent lifestyle, showing that you have materialistic goods at your disposal, also highlights a similar status.
We'll never know if Mahmood would have eventually come to his senses and stopped his criminality, or even whether this decorated officer will ever admit why he threw it all away. What was the reasons you think he got involved? Was it financial gain for himself? Was it leaned on by criminals himself?
Well, there's nothing to suggest, ultimately, when Kashif is at court, where he says anything like that. He doesn't say, you know, they were blackmailing me, they were threatening me, or doing anything like that. He doesn't take that route, because he actually pleads beforehand. So he's accepting what the charge is. So there's nothing to suggest that he was leaned on by anyone. I just think he saw the flamboyant lifestyle that they lived around him, that he thought, well, I want a piece of that action. He was living the dream.
The gang was sentenced to a total of 60 years for their role in the robberies and for supplying drugs. On the 13th of May 2021 at Southwark Crown Court, ex-Metropolitan Police Officer Kashif Mahmood was sentenced to 8 years in prison, reduced from 12 years for pleading guilty and preventing a trial. How does it make you feel when you have one of your own mixing with criminals like this and getting 8 years?
Well, for a start, he's never one of mine now. And the fact he's a criminal who is engaging with organised criminals, he has absolutely violated the trust that he had. What he's done, he's ruined the reputation, not only, you know, of himself, but other officers who every day are out there putting their life on the line, and he does this, and we all get tarred. 8 years is not long enough for him.
So what was the fallout from a corrupt cop committing such criminal acts whilst working in the Metropolitan Police? Is there any sympathy for Mahmood in this case?
You can be sure that inside that police station, there won't be any sympathy for him. There's nothing the police hate more than a bad cop. The Met has a lot of problems at the moment. Trust in the Met and the police has plummeted in this city, and the last thing they need is a dodgy cop.
One thing I want to know is what became of the puppet master out in Dubai, Mujtaba Niazmand.
Although Mujtaba Niazmand was mentioned in the criminal proceedings, he has never been brought to justice and has never been arrested. We know that Niazmand has never been found.
But for now, this was a win for the police, weeding out a corrupt cop.
We talk a lot about cops gone bad, and in terms of Mahmood, I think we can safely say he fits that bill 100%. He was obviously a confident individual who felt that he wouldn't be caught. It could have been in many ways the perfect crime.
And then end up getting caught, obviously.
Crime never pays.
The attraction of easy money clearly played a part in Mahmood being involved with an international drugs gang. I mean, he's a police officer and he tried to escape his past. It's just greed got the better of him.